Hello and welcome to our ongoing Lenten Bible study. We're glad you're with us today. I will admit that looking on the camera today, I look kind of rough. I trimmed my beard down for the spring, and now it looks like I just don't know how to shave anymore. But that's just one of those little things that happens this time of year. Like I was saying, we're glad you're here, and today we're going to continue our discussion about good and evil as we are really beginning our Lenten journey to Jerusalem. And we as Christians have to start really coming to terms with the problem of evil. Evil is something that really hamstrings all the things we say. We talk about God being love and God being the creator of the universe and God loves us and God sent his only son, and we talk about all this great stuff. But if God really loved us, why is there evil? Why do children die of AIDS or cancer? Why is there war? Why is Ukraine going through what it's going through right now as we speak? Why do bad things happen to good people? And this has been an ongoing discussion through the religious community for thousands of years. This is not something new. Um, there have been discussions about how, well, if God is all powerful and if God is all knowing and if God does this, that, and the other, there shouldn't be any evil. And a scholar by the name of Friedrich Leibniz uh, came up with the idea of this is the world, the best possible world there is of all the other worlds out there, because God loves us and because God would only want the best for us. God has chosen, of all the infinite options out there, God has chosen the best one. It may not look like it, but if anything else had been chosen, it would have been worse. Now, Voltaire wrote the play Candide, or about this, or actually, it's a story. And Candide is living in a world where he is following someone who believes in Leibniz's concept of this being the best perfect world. And every time you turn around, something bad's happening. His mentor, scholar, teacher comes down with syphilis. One of his maids, nursemaids, winds up eating half of her buttock because they're in a siege. It's just every time you turn around, some over the top, weird, bad thing happens. But Candide keeps saying, well, this has to be the best possible thing. And it's obviously not. When we look at our world, we have to admit that Chernobyl is not the best possible outcome. We have to admit that COVID 19 is not the best possible outcome, whether it came from a laboratory or whether it came from somebody eating a infected bat or whatever. It doesn't matter where it came from. The fact is it's here. And this is not the best possible world. So, how can we possibly say that God loves us or that God's in control or that God has all this power when evil is so much around us? It permeates us. As a matter of fact, I was reading a study not that long ago that was talking about how many ounces of plastic are in each and every one of us because of microfiber breakdown of plastic and how we have ingested it day after day, year after year. And we have just this huge ball of plastic that's in our body. There's a batch of plastic in the Pacific Ocean larger than Rhode Island. How do we come to terms with this idea? How do we accept the evil of today and the evil of the world around us? And for me, uh, first of all, I have to say that I cannot uh, stand by the traditional concept of God being all knowing, all powerful, immutable. all the various attributes that are so over the top that we have placed God in. Um, I think it limits God and it paints us into corners that we shouldn't be in. There's no reason to be in these corners. Suffice it to say that God is powerful enough. God is knowing enough. God is stronger and immutable enough. But there's no way that we could have all these attributes to God just for the simple fact that even just the concept of time. Time is an artificial thing that we came up with to explain the past, to earmark the present, and to discuss the future. It's not real. All we have is today. All we have is this very instant that we're talking and living in right now. Everything else is either gone or in the future. It has no bearing. It has no meaning. Uh, that's just part and parcel of the discussion that we're dealing with here, is the fact that we as human beings have created these immutable truths that are really immutable lies. Another one that's a great example is the universe. We teach the universe in circles. You start with the sun in the middle, and then you go with Mercury, and then Venus, and then Earth, and then Mars, and you just keep going out. And we proportionally put them around, but the orbits of the planets are not in exact circles. They're not on the same planes. Uranus actually has a completely different orbit to the rest of the planets, a totally different angle. But when we're teaching our kids, we use a two-dimensional diagram that does good enough. It's the same with the atom. The atom is a lot more chaotic than the solar system model that we use in high school chemistry, where we learn about protons, neutrons, electrons, and how they act and react with each other. They're not as simple as we like to make them. It's just easier to do the math. So we have these eternal lies that help us tell eternal truths. And we have these same eternal lies when it comes to God, because we're trying to describe something that's so far beyond our understanding. We're trying to understand a being that we cannot understand. It's just impossible. And as you read the Bible makes that fairly clear. God tells one of the Old Testament prophets, if I were in trouble, I wouldn't come to you. You're not the one who I'd come to if I had need. And that's something that we need to understand, that's not our role, that's not our place. We have other objects and other things that we're supposed to do. Excuse me for just a second. Pardon me. So, here we are with evil. And the one truth that we cannot get away from is the fact that evil is in our lives. It's all around us. It exists. And we have to understand that sometimes part of the evil is the fact that what is good for this person is not good for that person. And we have survival of, we call it the fittest, but it's not really even the fittest. It's survival of the most audacious in some cases, I guess would be the best way to put it. The powerful, the survival of the majority, survival of the loudest in the group. And so we have these things. Now, I believe that evil is a part of our life. It is a part of creation. And if you look at the Old Testament concept of God, God is considered to be an Oriental or Far Eastern monarch, total power. God has final say on everything. And we see this in the book of Job, where God has his advisors and God has discussions with Satan, who comes across more as a lower dignitary, a prosecuting attorney, something of that nature. But all the evil of the world has to come through God, and God has to say, okay, that's fine, you can do that. This would go to Dwight Eisenhower on D-Day. Dwight Eisenhower wrote the orders and set the time and sent the motion in order, where hundreds and thousands of young men died on that day, both German, French, British, American, you name it. The whole world was there that day, and young men and women from every nation died. And he did that. It was his order. It was his decision, and he had to make it. A lot of good people never were even born because their fathers died on the shores of Normandy. That's how it works. Sometimes good comes out of something very evil. And this brings us to the concept of free will. God can make sure that no evil befalls us, but in order to do that, God has to be totally in charge of everything in our lives. And we even have to say that free will comes in the fact that God is not here. We do not have times when we walk up into Washington, D.C., or London, or Moscow, or Jerusalem, and see God incarnate. I believe there is a God because I believe there is a God, and that was a choice I made. It's how the universe makes sense to me. But if God is literally on God's throne in Jerusalem, I don't have any free will about believing in God. God's there. There's no way to deny it. We can't get away from this situation. That said, God took God's own personhood out of the equation. Here are the signs that I exist. Do you believe? Here is the stories that I am giving you to modify your life, to mold you into a better human being. Do you believe? And we have the free will to accept or reject. And that's something we have to come to terms with. These are our decisions, whether we decide to believe in God or not, whether we decide to be evil or not, whether we decide to walk the straight and narrow or not. All of these things come into play. And God so loved us that God gave us free will. And it doesn't matter if your grandparents were the founders of the church. It doesn't matter if your uncle's in the clergy. It doesn't matter if you sang in the choir until you were 16. If you don't accept Christ, if you don't acknowledge Christ, if you don't fully embrace the discipleship that is offered to you, then you're not a Christian. And that's just how it is. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. Once again, it comes up to you. That's your free will. But you also have the free will to accept the punishment and the reward. Here recently, because of COVID, we've been hearing a lot about people's rights and everybody's freedoms. Well, the problem with that is you do have the freedom not to wear a mask. You do. But you also still have the responsibility of making sure that the people who are around you do not suffer because of your decisions. So if you choose not to get vaccinated, if you choose not to wear a mask, that's fine. But your decisions are not just your own, and that's where Christianity comes in as well. You have to understand that you also have responsibility. God has given you free will. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to accept Christ. You don't have to do any of that. But if you don't, you do have to accept the consequences of your decisions, whatever those may be. And that is the situation we find ourselves in. We have evil in the world because we are evil. We have that in us. Everybody has that possibility within them. And the reality is that, especially once again in society of today, we are trying to spend so much time saying something is black and white, and it's not. Many of our founding fathers, and most of them really were fathers, there weren't a whole lot of leading women because they weren't allowed to lead. Uh, but they had a lot of really good qualities. They created the republic for which we now live. But they also created slavery. And we have to acknowledge that slavery is a part of our founding history, part of our founding existence. This country was born in sin. There's no way around it. And it doesn't matter how many governors from southern states try to say you can't teach about slavery and you can't make white people feel bad. Reality is it's there. Now that doesn't mean that white people didn't die in the Civil War to free the slaves. That doesn't mean that there weren't a lot of really good things that happened. A lot of good men. George Washington was a good man. From all the biographies we have, he was a good leader, and he was a practical leader. He didn't fight the war he wanted to fight, he fought the war he had to fight. And it's, as you study him, it's a remarkable story. And he did a lot of good, but he still owned slaves. Those are the realities that we have to live with. And so as we begin this journey, we have to realize that we will, in fact, be dealing with original sin. And that original sin is what brings us on our journey today. Look forward to having more discussion with you next week, and hope you have a good journey to Jerusalem yourself. God bless.